Wow. I'm really sorry to interrupt these ebullient sounds this morning and to think you haven't even had coffee yet, or maybe you've had a few. My name is Tanya Hornick, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 Institute of Public Administration Australia Queensland Chief Executives and Emerging Leaders Breakfast. I am the Vice President and Secretary of IPAA Queensland and steward of our Emerging Leaders Working Group. And together with my inquisitive, kind-hearted, intelligent and noble-minded colleague, Jeff Ikin, that's I-K-I-N, if you didn't pick up the earlier pun, and he's one of our foundational members of our Emerging Leaders Working Group, and together we will be your MCs for this morning's event. So good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Tanya.
I'd like to welcome and acknowledge IPAA Queensland President Deirdre Mulkiran, my fellow IPAA Queensland councillors, some of whom are smattered around the room, Directors General, IPAA Queensland partners and sponsors, Chief Executives, distinguished guests, leaders and emerging leaders. Welcome to you all. And welcome to the iconic main auditorium of Brisbane City Hall. In the event that alarm sounds here this morning, which we do not want, or there is an emergency, please follow the IPAA and Brisbane City Council staff, or follow me. I'll be following them. Now, did you know that this room was dubbed by early performers as the 2-acre paddock? Sound travels well in this room. So can I please ask you to ensure that your mobile devices are on silent? These do not meet the definition of pipes that we would like to hear in this room. But we don't really want to be hearing the ones behind me either. However, Josh, I hope you've warmed your pipes up. In preparing for today, I was reminded of a quote by Lyndon Baines Johnson, which seems fitting for this morning because the Johnson Space Centre in Houston carries his name. Now, LBJ once said, "There are no problems that we cannot solve together, and very few we can solve by ourselves." The Chief Executives and Emerging Leaders Breakfast is a chance for you all to be curious about challenges on the horizon for public purpose, leadership and work, and we hope that today is a rich destination for discovery and a driver for conversation and connection around issues that matter. This year, we have moved to an electronic program, which hopefully gives you more room to spread your wings at your table. You can access the program using the QR code, and throughout the event, you can submit questions via Slido. The links to the program and Slido are up on the screen. Now, if you do submit a question, and I encourage you to, please add your name and department to your question. There might be a prize in it for you. Oh, not might, there is. Now, who's excited to kick off this event? Anyone? Oh, really? Come on, let's hear you. Are we excited? I know I am. The Emerging Leaders Working Group started taking little steps towards shaping, developing and crafting this event directly after last year's breakfast. So today, we get to join them in taking this leap. Jeff, can you tell us a little bit more about the Emerging Leaders' involvement in the event today, please?
Thanks, Tanya. The Emerging Leaders Working Group has been working alongside the IPAA Queensland team to develop this event, including the advice on the selection of impactful topics for public sector service employees, and also on the choice for the keynote speakers. So we're glad to have Josh with us today. The working group champions and supports a range of activities and events through the IPAA Queensland roster and provides ideas and advice on how to best engage with emerging leaders. Additionally, it's also been a fantastic opportunity to receive coaching and mentoring from the IPAA counsellors, such as Tanya here, and to be exposed to broader public service directions and thinking while members develop their networks and capability. Now, to start the event today, it's my pleasure to introduce songwoman Maruchi Baramba to perform a Welcome Country. She is the songwoman and lawwoman of the Turrbal tribe with extensive experience both in the performing arts and developing a better understanding of Aboriginal culture.
Balandiko kundul numbeler, Balandiko kundul numbeler, yang indai, yang go, kundai, yang go. Balandiko kundul numbeler, Balandiko kundul numbeler. Balandiko kundul numbeler, Balandiko kundul numbeler, yang indai, yang go, kundai, yang go. Balandiko kundul numbeler, Balandiko kundul numbeler. Yadani Australian Nabayagari Murumbaga Da Kalamaiki Berendangale Hill Biginumba Ikita Milan Murumba Bulkairi Yadani Australia Boo. Yadani Australia Boo means advanced Australia in strength, and in particular the strength which is contained in wisdom. Bulkairi Marumba Mianjanu, that's welcome to Brisbane in the language of the Turrbal people, a bit early in the morning. My name is Maruchi Baramba, which means a black swan, from those people who sing up the wind, hence the colour of the painting on the back of my cloak. A little bit about the Turrbal people. We were actually documented as being extinct, on the verge of extinction, way back in the early 1860s, and it's just been one small family that has survived the impact of European settlement upon our ancestral homelands. In saying that, we acknowledge that we are a part of a much larger societal group which takes in all of the tribes of southeastern Queensland. Me, myself, I'm actually from Cherbourg, which is a big Aboriginal community up at Kingroy, near Kingroy. In historical times, Queensland had laws whereby all Aboriginal, or persons who were deemed to be Aboriginals, under the statute of the day, were all rounded up and either placed on government reserves or church missions. And those places actually became melting pots of all of the tribes of Queensland, like my community. We had people brought in from all over Queensland into Baramba Aboriginal settlement, which later got the name Cherbourg. So in these veins, I've got the blood of 6 Queensland tribes, or well, 1 New South Wales, that's it comes over into Queensland, so just a little bit, but I'll just rattle them all off. And that tribe in New South Wales, second largest in New South Wales. Okay, Turrbal of Brisbane, Gubba of the Sunny Coast, Walker of the South Burnett area, and the Gamilaroi, that's the New South Wales one, which comes up as far as St George and at Mungandoi and Tallwood area of Queensland. That's just my mum's tribal identities, and my dad's tribal identity is Birrigubba Gungaloo. I'm here in my representation of the Turrbal people, and in particular being a descendant of Dakiyaka, who was the chief of the old Brisbane tribe way back in the 1830s or so, and that name was actually anglicised to the Duke of York, so it would not be a strange thing when reading Queensland history books of the notion of the Duke of York tribe. In fact, the valley over there where I think they're planning to build a new Olympic stadium used to be called York's Hollow way back in the first 20 years of European settlement here in Moreton Bay at the time. And it was because that was the main camp, Aboriginal camp, and he was actually documented as being chief of the old Brisbane tribe. So he's in some of the history books. That's a little bit about me. Why I slipped the anthem into my welcome to country is mainly to acknowledge my otherness as well. I like to reciprocate the acknowledgement of country that a lot of organisations are reaching out to us to do. We here in Brisbane do welcome to countries, which is slightly different because you have to have bloodline to country to speak for country. So, but I'd like to extend reciprocate the acknowledgement of country here to you as fellow Australians, and also it's the way of acknowledging my otherness, which I call my New World Australian identity, as opposed to my ancient Australian identity. My New World Australian identity is African American Australian descent, British Australian descent, and Ceylonese Australian descent. Ceylonese South Indian, that's what all the convict records say, descent. The African American was a runaway slave that ended up in the Victorian goldfields at the time of the Eureka Stockade. What a lot of people don't know, that 2 Afros were charged along with the famous Peter Laylaw at the Eureka Stockade and the 10 others. All were acquitted but one from the charges of treason. One of the Afros came from the West Indies, the other came from New York City. My great-grandfather came from St. Louis, and when they supposedly ran out of gold down in Victoria, came to the Queensland gold rush. And that's probably how come I'm standing here at the moment. That's a little bit of that history. He was a runaway slave, and I remember my dad telling me about him having part of his foot chopped off, and I used to think, oh, poor fella, he might have had sugar diabetes, but after seeing the movie, the 12 Years a Slave, that's what they did with the runaway slaves, so he succeeded the second time, I reckon, going from St. Louis and then ended up here in Australia. So, both my grandmothers are British Australian genetics. One is documented in historical documentation as being quarter caste Aboriginal, the other was half caste Aboriginal. They were both taken to a reserve under the Aborigines protection and preservation policies of their day, and it was mainly because they both lived habitual Aboriginal lifestyles, and generally they were the ones who were taken to the community. Not all persons of Aboriginal genetics was taken out of country. In fact, the ones who were left behind were not necessarily practitioners of culture. So, my Ceylonese South Indian ancestor was a convict, arrived in 1816, served his 7 years in Tasmania, became a free man after that, reoffended, the naughty boy, and they sent him up here. So he ended up being a Moreton Bay convict. And he also dropped some of the plans of Brisbane City while working under the first surveyor here, but he also was a runaway. So he'd run away from the penal settlement and lived with the blackfellas around here, and they bring him back. He'd get his 250 lashes, but he did it more than once, so it was probably worth it to run away than to hang around slaving away. You know, what we call hard jacker is actually from our language, and that, I suppose, it's got its fame from people who were speaking to Brisbane Aboriginals about the poor old convicts chipping away with the, trying to fix make roads and everything here. Anyway, that's just a little bit about the history, and when we do a Welcome to Country, that is done as a blessing of the gathering in a song. I shall do that now. Would like to extend the appreciation of the Turrbal people. Turrbal, not terrible. Well, sometimes we call ourselves terrible because we like to stir, be a thorn in the side on sometimes. And extend our appreciation to you for having us here in this capacity today. It's, I think it's a blessing we get the opportunity to do this. I mean, a little bit also about myself. I'm probably the first tertiary Aboriginal dramatic arts graduate, graduating from Vic College of the Arts way back in the 70s. I mean, even NIDA wasn't tertiary accredited at the time, but it gives us an opportunity to tell our stories, because when I'd finished the VCA, there was hardly much going on about blackfellas in the theatre industry or whatever, other than the ones like, no, I better not go there. I'm also a classically trained opera singer, studied in both. I have to blow my trumpet. In the US, France and Germany. Okay, I shall now do the blessing of the gathering, and thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel and Marie, for the Welcome to Country and for sharing the history with us, that we should reflect on it, and also for showing the enduring customs and traditions of Aboriginal people. I'd now like to introduce Deirdre Mulcairn, the President of IPAA Queensland, to provide the President's welcome.
Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deirdre Mulcairn. It's my great privilege to be the Queensland President of IPAA, and my day job is I'm the Director General for the Department of Child Safety, Seniors and Disability Services. Shout out to my colleagues who are over there. Thanks to Tanya and Jeffrey, and of course particular thanks to songwoman Marucci. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional lands of the Jagera and Turrbal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Can I also acknowledge my fellow IPAA councillors and my colleague chief executives present. So welcome everybody to the annual Chief Executives and Emerging Leaders Breakfast on behalf of the IPAA Queensland Council. So this event celebrates the future of public sector leadership and is an opportunity for CEOs and senior leaders to celebrate and support emerging talent. This is IPAA's largest annual gathering and has become an anticipated annual feature of the public sector calendar in Queensland. It's a hot ticket, as you can see. We are crammed in like sardines in this room. There's not another person who could sit in this room. And this event is known for its opportunity for you to hear from unique and thought-provoking speakers, challenging our thinking about leadership and public service. This is our 7th year in promoting this event. Look around the room. There are 600 emerging leaders and senior executives in this room, representing around 50 organisations from state and Commonwealth sector, as well as our private sector partners. As you've heard already, our Emerging Leaders Working Group have played an important hands-on and hearts-in role in planning today's event, particularly around the topic and the speaker, and I thank them for their work. I'd also like to thank my partner in crime, Tanya, the Queensland Vice President and Secretary, for her stewardship of that group. At IPAA Queensland, we seek to support public sector professionals to build connections, be challenged in our thinking, and to keep informed on the latest in practice. And this event today will absolutely achieve this, and I have no doubt that you're in for a really interesting and thought-provoking morning. No pressure, Josh. IPAA is the only professional association for public sector professionals in Queensland. We exist to be an independent driver of thought leadership and knowledge building in the sector, and to provide opportunities for people to connect with like-minded colleagues from across the system. We have grown our reach in recent years, now with 30 government organisation members, and this year we are partnering with several non-government members who also share in our mission. In this last year, our small but mighty team delivered a dozen events featuring around 28 leaders and experts in their fields. We also introduced a new initiative this year, our Mastercraft series, designed to deliver a masterclass in the craft of public service. Last year, we celebrated International Women's Day for the first time as part of our Stewards on the Couch series. And like today's event, this has already become a valued and important fixture for the sector with another successful event this year. Key events for the next 6 months are included in the digital program. I'd like to thank the CEOs of the 30 Queensland government organisations, many of whom who are here today, who continue to make IPAA a strong voice for thought leadership in Queensland, and particularly my thanks to the Queensland Public Sector Commission for their support of IPAA Queensland. I'd also like to acknowledge our major sponsor, Q Super, part of Australian Retirement Trust, who have been a supporter of this event now for 5 consecutive years, and I look forward to hearing from Dave Woodall, Chief Commercial Officer, later. If you were here last year, you would remember I made a lot of jokes about the importance of Q Super, so I won't go off script this year. Dave, your success is my success, is our success. We are all very, very invested in you personally and your colleagues. If there's any further love that we can show you, please feel free to call it out. We feel very warmly towards QSIP, and me particularly, because I'm a woman of a certain age. It's not a personal come on, I'm just very interested in your commercial success. So please carry on to be extraordinary. Feel free. Thanks also to KPMG, who have been a long-term partner of IPAA and now in their 6th year of supporting this event. Also like to welcome On Talent, who have again joined in supporting this year's event, and have become our emerging leaders partner, supporting IPAA to encourage the capability and skill building of our emerging leaders working group. Thank you all to all of our partners and sponsors, many of whom are here today, and I encourage you to meet and mingle with each other. I encourage you, everyone, to make the most out of your IPAA membership throughout the year by getting involved in our other events, such as our Stewards on the Couch. My speech says breakfast will be served shortly, and there was an optional joke about smashed avocado and not contributing to the housing crisis. We'll skip that. So I'd like now to welcome back our MCs, to introduce a short video from our partner on talent, and then to introduce our keynote speaker, Josh Richards. Thank you all for coming this morning.
Thank you, Deirdre. Pretty hard act to follow, right? It seems like we have two comedians in the house today. I'm not one of them, by the way. So as Deirdre said, here at IPAA Queensland, the Emerging Leaders Working Group makes a significant contribution to IPAA Queensland's important role in supporting the profession of public service here in our great state. They provide a particular lens for young professionals and emerging leaders and inform and challenge IPAA Queensland's thinking on topics, issues and the key drivers of this event. And we're very pleased to welcome Deb and her team from On Talent as our sponsors for this year, and we look forward to working with them to further the group's work in connecting emerging leaders with IPAA Queensland's purpose. So let's find out some more about On Talent. Heads up, you might see some faces that you know.
I'm constantly surprised by the power of purpose. I think if you can give people a sense of real purpose, it's motivating, it helps them to show up day in, day out and have a real understanding of why they're doing what they're being asked to do.
It's always an interesting journey, leadership, but one of the things that I love is the delight that you have in watching people grow and be successful.
Every day I am genuinely surprised by the talent and the depth of our workforce and our people.
I think it's about how do we harness those sort of technology advances to make sure the work that we do as people adds best value.
With the advent of technology and AI and factors like that, it's going to become more and more important for leaders to understand how they can blend technology with people to get the outcomes that they seek.
Look, I think I would have liked to start understanding the inequities that people face across the state much earlier.
For us as leaders, our tools of our trade are our mental and physical selves. So we've got to be able to take care of ourselves along the way. It becomes a little bit more important as you get a little bit older.
I wish I'd learnt earlier the difference between confidence and competence. A lot of people show up very confidently, and that sometimes masks a lack of competence.
I would have stopped, I'm still trying to stop, I suppose, comparison and self-doubt.
What I'll keep doing is trying to inspire people through purpose, through giving them an understanding of the why.
I would continue to be really authentic and deliberate about building my network because these are the people who will travel with me through my long career.
Opportunities like this that my beloved boss has given me, I keep accepting those challenges, and even though it might be a bit daunting, just lean into it and give it a crack.
It's incredibly important for individual development, but also organisational health.
I can hand on heart say that I wouldn't have progressed or found my way in my early career without the significant investment others have made in me. And it's really often just about demystifying the next level or help them pivot from one goal to the next.
Hand in hand with mentoring is the idea of championing. Be and to have a champion, someone that's going to mention your name and say really good things about you even when you're not in the room.
I think great advice is to double down on your strengths.
To be visible and to be yourself, but be consistent in your delivery and your approach. Your leaders really want to know you.
Sometimes you will say to yourself, how hard can it be? Spoiler alert, sometimes it's going to be really hard.
You grow the most where you're already strong. You get a better return on investment if you double down on your strengths
chase experience that gives you depth rather than chasing levels, because the opportunity to progress keeps presenting itself, but you will need the depth.
Most of the time it's worth the effort and going through the challenges.
To be happy for other people's success as they progress, because there's room for everybody to do some really great things.
Don't grow that mullet and don't wear that apricot jacket.
To wear lower heels, your 40 plus self will thank you.
Just go for it.
Thank you again On Talent for that video, and there are definitely a few familiar faces there. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Josh Richards. As many of you have read in the event program, Josh has an incredibly diverse background, having been a physicist, explosives engineer, soldier, comedian, astronaut candidate, and cave diver. Josh will share why paying attention to the finer details is important when approaching a transformation and innovation agenda, and why sometimes things just don't go to plan, leading us to review, reflect, and reorient. With the public purpose sector needing to be creative, innovative, and approaching policy decisions with a fresh lens, Josh will provide the requisite inspiration in understanding how creativity has been applied in his fields in making transformation happen and sometimes fail. Throughout his presentation, the Slido link will remain active. The person who asks the most creative and innovative question receives the prize of access to On Talent's Amplify program. And we've now got the QR code up if you want to log into that service. To submit the question through Slido, you can use either the digital program or this code. Coming up, Josh.
Thanks. All right, I'm on. Good morning, everyone. Please don't stop eating. Honestly, that breakfast looks amazing, and I'm a little bit jealous that I can't eat it, but I'm still an angry little ginger leprechaun that leaps up on stage and will vomit if I eat before a speech. So, good morning. First and foremost, who would put their knives and forks down, walk out of this hall, this gorgeous hall to start off with, and go to space this afternoon if they had the chance? There's a few hands, that's good. The poached eggs are good, but obviously not that good. I knew I wanted to go to space when I was about 7 years old, and I saw some stock footage on the 6 o'clock news of an Australian guy talking about how he was going to become Australia's first professional astronaut. The 6 o'clock news was talking about Andy Thomas. I was 7 years old at the time, and I saw that and went, oh my God, that is what I want to do. Turned around to my dad and said, I didn't know Australians could do that, and he said, they can't. Thanks, Dad. Fantastic. All about inspiring 7-year-old kids to aim and dream higher, my father. Anyway, at the time, he was right. Andy Thomas was an American citizen. When he went and joined NASA, was selected as part of their 1992 astronaut class. He wore an American flag on his right arm when he went into space. The photos of his spacesuit that you see has an American flag on it, but he was born in Adelaide. We now have another astronaut very recently, which is very exciting through the European Space Agency. But the reality is the pathway for Australians to try and go to space is still very, very challenging. So for a 7-year-old kid, it wasn't really an option. But things are getting a lot better. So I'm guessing a few folks will probably recognise this. This is Virgin Galactic's USS, short version, this is the one that blew up. A little bit awkward, did kill a guy, did seriously injure another guy in the process. But when you push in the limit of things, things break. Things go horribly wrong. And that is something that is going to be a theme of this morning. They built another one, and so far it's taken about 35 people into space. You can buy a ticket on this. So Virgin Galactic offer the opportunity to turn around, get on board inside this little rocket ship. It gets strapped underneath a much larger ship that takes about 4 or 5 hours to get up to the right altitude. It drops down underneath it like a cruise missile, rockets up past the 100-kilometre line, and you float around in space for about 6 to 8 minutes. The entire experience takes about 5 hours. And you get to bounce around inside a little tin tube with Richard Branson, probably covered in vomit. Again, enjoy that breakfast. The alternative to this, if Richard Branson's staring at you across through 0G is horrifying, you've also got the opportunity to go up in this horrifying thing. I don't know why they shaped it this way. Like seriously, like I've got a degree in applied physics, I've studied aerospace engineering. Why would you do this? You do not need to do, why does it bulge? Anyway, moving on. Much quicker, much shorter. The Blue Origin flight essentially has taken about 30, 35 people up into space as well. This thing sits on a pad, shoots up. It takes about 4 or 5 minutes to get to 100 kilometres. You get about 6 to 8 minutes of floating around in 0G, and then you land back again. So the entire experience is about 2 hours. Tickets for both range between about $200,000 and $250,000 US. So I know you all get paid magnificently as emerging leaders. So if anyone's got the money to go and buy a ticket, you can go and buy a ticket on this. I do not. I definitely did not grow up in an environment where family members were working in a corporate environment, very blue collar. So I grew up dreaming of doing this instead. Who here, instead of going up into space with Richard Branson, would go to the moon if they could? Few hands, that's good. A different question for you, and by all means call out. Can anyone recognise who this is? You're way too polite. We're going to have a lot of fun in the next 40 minutes. So there's about 125 photos that were taken of that first crewed mission as part of Apollo 11, and almost all of them are of Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon. There's 2 photographs from all of those photos of Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. This is one of them. You can actually see Neil in Buzz's visor there. So that's one of the photos. And the other photo is as Neil's climbing back inside the lunar module and Buzz has taken a photo of his arse. All the other photos are of Buzz Aldrin. Buzz is also famous for another thing. He may not have been the first man to step on the moon, but he was the first man to pee on the moon. So he used the toilet system that they had once they landed and is well known and renowned for that. He's also still alive, which helps for Buzz's PR as well. To get there, they essentially got into something about the same size as a minibus with another guy, Michael Collins. The 3 of them spent 3 days getting to the moon. Then 2 of them got inside something the size of a marina and spent 24 hours getting down to the surface of the moon, hung out inside the capsule for another few hours. They got bored, sleeping in like weird, awkward positions, climbed out, walked around on the moon for a few hours, came back, and then met back up with Mike Collins and flew back again. So all up, the entire process took about a week. In that time, like I said, you were living inside something that's either the size of a minibus or a marina. And again, the toilet situation, suboptimal, basically tubes and plastic bags. So, and again, I'm aware this is breakfast, so we're not going to go into too much detail here, but if anyone here has ever crapped in a plastic bag, it's not a great experience. Also, they give off gas and pop, which is not a good thing either. They actually have to work through a powder through it to stop it giving off gas as well, because otherwise these things would explode while you're inside a tiny little spaceship hundreds of thousands of kilometres from Earth. Dreamy. Anyway, who would go to Mars if they had a chance? There's a few less hands. Good. There should be less hands because this is worse. So much worse. So Uncle Elon has been planning and talking about sending people to Mars for a long time. A lot of people have been planning it for a long time before him. But the journey to Mars is incredibly challenging. Doesn't matter, like this is pure physics and engineering now. This doesn't matter how comfortable you make it. It's incredibly challenging. Getting to Mars, even on the shortest trip you can possibly do, is about 6 to 7 months, stuck inside a tin tube. Once you get there, you have a choice. You can either spend 2 weeks on the surface of Mars and spend the next 1.5 years coming back, involving a close flyby of Venus, where you basically get a lifetime radiation dose in the process, so you'll never go to space and can never work in a nuclear reactor ever again. Or you get to spend 2.5 years on the surface of Mars and then spend another 6 or 7 months coming back. Either way, you're staring at the same stupid faces for nearly 4 to 5 years while you're going and exploring a cold, desolate planet that is desperate to kill you at every chance it gets. So I actually go and speak in a lot of schools and talk about this sort of stuff. We kind of dial back the language a little bit, but it basically means skipping high school, which a lot of kids are super keen for. Anyway, I did not sign up for a mission to Mars with Elon Musk. I signed up for something much smaller, much, much smaller. Elon's talking about being able to send crews of 50 to 100 people to Mars in one go. We were talking about 4. And we'll get back to Mars 1 in a little bit, but essentially trying to send people to Mars is incredibly challenging. Trying to bring them back, next to impossible. What Elon is doing with all of his plans at the moment, bringing back boosters, landing things, extraordinary. It's all laying the groundwork for sending people to Mars and potentially bringing them back. I got involved with something that was a little bit different. The first thing that we needed to figure out when we try and send people to Mars is where the water is. From water, we can produce oxygen, we can produce hydrogen, which we can then blend with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to produce methane and fuel. But water was the key factor in all of this. And unfortunately, there was a bit of an issue in the early 2000s with one of the orbiters around Mars, a very, very small mistake. Talking about finer details. So the Mars Climate Orbiter was supposed to be NASA's way of collecting data on the nature of Mars, looking at weather patterns, being able to identify where the water was, being able to identify lots of different things. The Americans, along with, I think it's Myanmar and maybe one other country, are still using Imperial for some bizarre reason. And one of their contractors, even though they're contracted to operate in SI units, in metric, they were still using Imperial. So it fed a bunch of Imperial data, foot-pounds, into something that was supposed to be Newton meters. This thing flew in and basically just burnt up in the Martian atmosphere, just because one company decided that they wanted to use slightly different rules and we'll just change it later, and they never changed it. So super minor detail ended up destroying what was a $100 million climate orbiter that would have provided vital information on being able to send people to Mars in the future. If once we figure out where the water is, we've got a fairly good reference, we can start sending supply missions. So the idea would be identify an area where we know that there's significant water, start landing capsules, and it's a way of testing the technology in the process. Landing things on Mars, insanely difficult to do. The atmosphere is just thick enough that things burn up, but also too thin for you to really slow down properly. So you're doing about 70,000 kilometres an hour, and you need to slow down from that speed to 0 in about 6 or 7 minutes. So fairly significant G-forces, fairly significant issues. Testing the landing systems, vital. Being able to have supplies on the surface of Mars is also kind of important if you want to have people alive on there. So each one of these modules, we're looking at sending about 4 or 5 of them purely full of supplies, and that would supply 4 people for about 8 years, purely on ration packs, purely on... Has anyone eaten a ration pack? Few hands? Yeah, I still got a rash thinking about it, like horrifying. But it'll keep you alive if that's what you need to do. So once we get there, the idea would be to also have rovers that would be able to pull these things together. Because again, landing things on Mars, you could have these modules land anywhere in a 10 square kilometre area. So we need to be able to drag them all together, start laying out solar panels, start rigging everything together, and essentially have a fully automated base on the surface of Mars, ready to go, full of oxygen, full of potentially plants, waiting. We essentially leave it there for 2 years. Sits there, does nothing for 2 years. Any guesses why we would leave it there doing absolutely nothing for 2 years? This is not going to be an interactive event, is it? No. If things are going to go wrong, they're going to happen in the first 2 years. If something's going to break, from an engineering perspective, we know if something's going to break, it's probably going to break in the first couple of years. And if it survives those first couple of years, chances are it's going to last for another 10 to 15. But if something is going to go wrong, it'll be in those first couple of years. And we really want to make sure that this is all working, because 4 idiots are going to get in a tiny tin can and rocket off into the darkness of space to a home that if it's broken, they're dead. This horrifying little thing as well would potentially be home for 6 to 7 months. Again, I speak in schools quite a bit, and we talk about awkward and unusual questions, which I love. Please submit those. But kids look at this, and you can see the little brains doing the math. They're like, where does the poo go? Because they know you're eating. They know you're stuck inside a little tin can that's about the same size as a school bus for 7 months. Where does all the waste go? Can't just fire it off and like smatter someone's satellite or anything like that. So where does it all go? Handy little thing. Turns out there's 3 things that are fantastic for blocking radiation. Most people assume that lead is the thing to use when we want to talk about blocking radiation. That's fantastic if you're in a hospital, if you're working in a nuclear reactor, if some sort of environment where we're dealing with that kind of radiation source. The radiation we're dealing with when we're in space is much higher energy. And if it hits something like lead, it's basically like a shotgun blast of energized particles going off inside a spaceship. So we don't line spaceships with lead because essentially you're going to be cooking the astronauts inside rather than protecting them. What is really good at absorbing that kind of radiation is water. Water's fantastic for it. Food. And solid human waste. So essentially what we're going to be doing is eating the food off the walls. We're going to line the inside of it with water and food packets. Eat the food, vacuum up and vacuum dry the waste that's left behind, and then pack it up on the walls. So I get to tell 7-year-olds that I'm going to Mars in a spaceship covered in shit. It's great. Who's still keen? Who wants to come to Mars? But the things that you do, the small factors that factor in, and the design decisions that you've got to make based on these tiny little things. We didn't even know that those kind of cosmic rays and high energy particles that we had in space existed until astronauts, as part of the Apollo program, went to the moon, went out beyond the Earth's Van Allen belts and started to see these flashes of light in their eyes. Didn't even know the particles existed until we started to do more research and realise, oh, actually lining spaceships with lead is not a thing. So again, I feel like I'm centering on the toilet stuff here, but it does make a really good point. So small things make a big difference. And the design decisions that you make aren't necessarily the most intuitive ones. So we've got 2 space toilets here. The one on the left is the one that was on the space shuttle, and it was delightful. It had little straps to hold you into place. It had a little heated seat. You can figure out what the hose on the side there is all about, and basically you were sitting on the top of a vacuum blender. Not comforting, but did the job most of the time, except when it broke. So for a lot of kids, they go, you know what, when I grow up, I don't want to just be an astronaut, I want to be a space shuttle pilot. I want to fly rocket ships in space. And I go, that's great. Do you know what the pilot's job is when they're not flying the plane, like not flying the space shuttle? They're basically the plumber. So most pilots, space shuttle pilots, were cross-trained as the plumber to repair the space shuttle toilet, and this thing broke all the time. And then you're back to those plastic bags again. So fairly horrifying. Kind of like, if you want to make a comparison, the US's space shuttle toilet was basically like a Formula 1 car. Super high performance, really, really great when it worked. Required a huge amount of maintenance. On the flip side, we've got this Soviet monstrosity on the right that is still being used on the International Space Station on the Russian side of things, and it is essentially a steel tube, and you sit on the top of that steel tube. Once again, the hose is pretty self-explanatory, but this thing is unheated. You have to hold yourself into place. You have to get everything lined up perfectly, because if you're not perfectly lined up, things come back out again. But it doesn't break. And at the end of the day, if we're going to be sending people to another planet, we can't be sending spare parts, we can't be calling out plumbers or technicians. We need something that's a little bit rough, but reliable. And when it comes to designing for something like sending people to another planet, you've got to try and balance how we look after people with the practicalities of the mission. We're running on a real razor edge, and so there's some creature comforts that a lot of us are very comfortable with, very fond of, that we kind of have to throw out the window a little bit. And that basically means crapping into Russian steel tubes. But that's how we get to Mars. If that's what we need to do, they're the things that we do. Talking about the radiation side of things again, we're also going to cover the living modules with dirt. Once we get there, things get a lot more comfortable. We've got the radiation protection from dirt. We're processing that dirt to extract the water out of it as well. And things inside are a lot more comfortable. So we've got fairly large living modules. This thing's essentially like a very large nuclear submarine. But instead of having dozens of people on board, 50 to 100 people, there's only 4 of us. So we've got a fair bit of living space. I mean, being trapped inside something like that, it's probably not that bad. Any guesses why we would try and make this so comfortable? Why we would, put it in perspective, trying to get 1 kilo of mass onto the surface of Mars costs about $18,000 to $20,000 US. So this stuff's heavy, it adds up real fast. Why we would go to the extra expense, I suppose, of making things so comfortable for people. So they don't kill each other in the first 12 months? I would say so they don't kill each other in the first 12 days. But yes, absolutely, like you want people to be comfortable, otherwise, environmental pressures. There is enough environmental pressures just being there that you want to try and make things comfortable. The first 12 months is pretty much there. The bigger factor is that we're not coming back. This is the bit that Mum's scared of. Mum's not a fan of this, to be honest with you. So in order to be able to get people to the surface of Mars, we needed to essentially design the mission to go one way. So this was not very much a case of exploration. We go there, plant a flag, check the place out again. This was about making Mars home. This was the challenging ethical issue that most people had with what I signed up with. So I signed up for Mars 1 in 2012. We'll get to my history a little bit, but I was doing something a little bit unusual at the time, and I happened to be researching Mars, and in fact researching one-way trips to Mars, and this was the appealing point for me. This is the thing where I'm like 100% yes. Like I wouldn't sign up for this if I had a return trip, but we'll get to that. The most horrifying thing of this entire thing for me was going vegan. We can't send cows to Mars at this point. We can't put a tiny pig in a spacesuit and rocket it off to the red planet. We essentially have to grow all of our own food, and we have to be sustainable. So it's not about like going green or anything like that. It's literally about resources. So I'm very fond of bacon. I am a big fan of bacon. And I recently found out that there's actually a type of Japanese seaweed which has been genetically engineered so that when you fry it, it tastes just like bacon. So I'm pushing for aquaponics on this. If we're going to have to be eating lima beans and quinoa and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things, I'm going for my Japanese seaweed so I can at least have something that vaguely resembles bacon. But we have to be fully self-sustaining. It tends to put off a lot of kids, but this is the thing that we need to do. We also get to eat crickets, grasshoppers, and cockroaches, because if you're going to raise a cow to the point where it could be slaughtered to be turned into a steak, the amount of protein that that cow produces takes about 2 years to get it to the age where it could be slaughtered. It requires about 8,000 kilos of feed, and it requires about 20,000 kilos of water. And when we're talking about those costs, $18,000 to $20,000 US, that's not a sustainable option. Comparably, you can produce the same amount of protein from grasshoppers inside a box that is about the size of that lectern. It will do it in about 6 weeks, and it will require about half a kilo of feed and about 800 ml of water. So crickets, grasshoppers, and cockroaches are going to be our protein options as well. Anyone who is still keen? Nope. We're still, that's good. Still a few hands. That's great. Enthusiastic. So 202,586 people signed up for this idiocy, knowing they'd have to give up family, friends, thick cut bacon, all of that. That was back in 2012. That's a while ago now. 202,586 people signed up. They cut the group down fairly quickly, so of those 200,000 plus people, there were about 14,000 genuine applications. A lot of people had started the application process, then backed out. They trimmed the 14,000 down to 1,058 fairly quickly by the end of 2013. And we were sent off for medicals. Folks who had adult ADD or major disabilities or different factors. One of the interesting things that actually trimmed people out, and again, a small thing making a big difference, if you'd broken your leg and had pins put in it, that actually excluded you from it. And we'll talk about scuba diving a little bit later on, but for folks who are familiar with the bends, it's nitrogen building up in your bloodstream, and those pins act as a concentrating point for nitrogen. So going to space with pins in your leg is generally not a thing, at this stage anyway. It might be in the future, but at this stage it's actually an excluding factor because you have the real chance of getting decompression sickness in space. So weird and wonderful things. A lot of Americans wanting to leave the planet. This was pre-Trump. I presume this number's gone up, but a lot of different folks, different backgrounds. The requirements to apply was that you were over 18. You could essentially pass a lower high school English exam. English was chosen as the base language for everyone because essentially it's the language of the space industry. So if you work in space pretty much anywhere except China and Russia, so all of the European countries, Japan, Korea, all these different folks who run their own space agencies, generally they'll have English as a second language. So English was kind of chosen as the base for everyone. No requirement for a degree, so we have folks who come from all kinds of all walks of life. We have lawyers, architects, checkout chicks, paramedics, anything. At the end of the day, it had less to do with what you are and more who you are. What kind of personality you have, how do you get along with other people. We'll get into the details of that a little bit further, but folks automatically assume that you would send the best doctor, the best engineer, the best psychologist, and honestly, it's horrifying. There have been missions on the space shuttle in particular, where those kind of crews were put together, and they often ended in violence, regularly ended in violence. So fun times all around, lots and lots of different folks from different areas, huge variety in the countries. I think we still have an Iranian candidate. We had a couple of Palestinian candidates for a while there, a Bolivian candidate. Everywhere you could possibly imagine, people were signing up and being shortlisted for a one-way mission to Mars. These days, we still do have the Mars 100. We still stay in touch. They trimmed the group down in 2015 to 100 candidates. I am up there, tucked away in the top right-hand corner of the M. Massive, massive variety of people. Surprising number of Australians. So Australians made up 7 of the 100 candidates. Again, still a lot of Americans wanting to leave the planet, but massive variety of different people from all different places. I mentioned there lots of different people from different careers, different backgrounds. I was not working in space when I signed up for this. The reality is I wasn't dressing up as this guy. The core thing out of all of this is trying to find people who get along with other people and not necessarily the adventurous types. What we really need is Homer Simpsons. We need folks who, when they get to the surface of Mars, are going to basically be couch potatoes because they are going to be sitting there for the first 2 years, not leaving the habitat. They're holding a beachhead. They're basically there to just keep things running, keep things alive. So Homer Simpsons, for Homer Simpsons, is actually a really good option for us to go and send people to Mars. The first crew will be probably really generic, really boring, sit around watching a lot of Netflix. But we also kind of need other characteristics to them as well. Sure, Homer in the way that they move around and how active and adventurous they are, but we kind of need MacGyvers as well. Kind of need folks who are a little bit of everything, not specialists in any way, and I don't mean like the new MacGyver, I mean old school Richard Dean Anderson with a mullet MacGyver. People who have lots of different skills, will try anything. Not specialists, not like this is my lane, this is all I do. People who will try and do lots and lots of different things, which kind of leads to why I got shortlisted, because I have done a few different things, and the reality is when I signed up for a one-way mission to Mars in 2012, I was dressing up as a giant koala. We'll see Keith shortly. Keith the anger management koala was horrifying. Look it up on YouTube, just don't show kids, ever, because they will learn things that you're not ready for them to learn. The big factor for us is really about people who get along with each other and people who can survive in confined environments, not just vent and not be able to escape each other. And some of the best people for that are submariners. People who've got experience working in confined environments, high stress environments, and literally in some cases, bed swapping. So one person gets up to go and start work for their shift and someone else literally gets into the same bed. That's how confined some of these submarines are. So submariners are fantastic folks for this kind of thing. People who overwinter in Antarctica are another one, because there's no escape. And there's some great stories, if you want to start researching, there's some great stories of things down in Antarctica going horribly wrong. People having to literally do surgery on themselves, improvising and adapting. An entire Antarctic base essentially being torn apart by Facebook. Yeah, if you do a little bit of research, there's some really interesting stories, but we've got some great research on how to put people together and work them in environments coming from Antarctica. And one of the others that we've got is essentially folks who do long-range patrols in the Arctic. So military units, a lot of research out of Norway, around how to go on these long expeditions, work together in small teams, and be able to carry out a mission. So I was not doing any of these things when I signed up. Like I said, I was dressing up as Keith. Keith, the anger management koala, used to talk about anger management on stage while showing a startling lack of it. The backstory behind Keith was that he was doing court-ordered anger management after a visit to a kindergarten, and essentially stood on stage and talked to people about all sorts of weird and wonderful things while playing ukulele, which is essentially a hobbit for guitar for hobbits. So anyway, I didn't start with Keith. I did start with the military. I did a degree in applied physics originally, but I also joined the army. I trained as a combat engineer, so essentially I did still run around with a gun, but I spent a lot of time, I suppose, embracing the engineer's perspective of we build it, we break it. Now, it's not hard to figure out, I'm not a big guy, so working on building bridges, not really my thing. At best, I would be the little ninja that would climb up into places and put pins in place, while the big, massive rugby-playing type guys would pick up these massive girder pieces. So I wasn't so good on the build it side of things. I was really good at the break it side of things. So blowing things up was something that I had developed a real talent for, especially, again, sneaking into places I wasn't supposed to be, blowing them up and running off into the distance. Again, angry little ginger leprechauns. Watch out for them, because they'll come out in the darkness and blow your stuff up. On the left-hand side here, we've got a 100mm beehive charge. Essentially, it's a shaped charge that will project a copper slug down through, so there was nothing left of that lump of wood afterwards. The photo on the right is a little bit hard to see, but the disturbed dirt on the bottom half of this photo is essentially a 4-metre hole, and that took about half a kilo of ammonium nitrate to create. So what we would often use is a penetrating charge to punch a hole down that you would then put a larger explosive into and then blow craters in. So we used to do this sort of stuff for destroying airfields, blowing up runways, all sorts of fun stuff. I was pretty good at this. I didn't love it. I didn't love the army at all. I got really frustrated with a lot of the bureaucracy. I moved across to the Navy, where I trained as a clearance diver, essentially doing this same sort of stuff, bomb disposal and bomb placement underwater. Got mucked around by the bureaucracy there as well. Was really lost. And it's interesting, I was chatting to someone before we started today. I was about your age when I was at the vast majority of this group anyway. I was about your age when I left the Australian Defence Force and was very lost, didn't know what to do with myself. And if I'd had a little bit of guidance, a little more sort of steering on opportunities, things that I should do, I probably wouldn't have made some of the decisions that I did later. It's made me who I am, and I'm very grateful for that, but I will say, don't go and join the British Royal Marine Commandos. Don't do this. Don't let your kids do this. It was horrifying. At the time, the Royal Marines and the British paratroopers were on continuous rotation in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. I was lost, very confused, very angry, and didn't know what to do with myself. And Dad stepped in once again to say, hey, you know your grandfather was one of the British commandos in World War II. And I was like, that's a great idea. Let's go and do that. Small things make big differences. I am shocked at how much I look like a child on the left-hand side here, but I was one of the few guys in my unit who had previous military experience. Pretty much everyone else was a fresh starter. Most of them were 18. I was 23 years old, one of the old boys, and had previous military experience. And that kind of put me in a bit of a leadership position fairly quickly on. We had 3 of us who had previous experience. Richie had gone all the way through, well, most of the way through training. So Royal Marine training is the longest infantry training course in the world. It's the only unit in the world where you can come in as a civilian, leave 8 months later and be deployed directly to a war zone. And most of the guys that I went through training with did exactly that. We were super high tempo in Helmand at the time, and so a lot of the guys who I trained with finished their course and went straight out to Helmand Province as part of casualty replacement. So guys being sent home after being hit by IEDs, being shot, were then being replaced by guys who 8 months later had been walking around the streets. So it's very high intensity, very challenging environment. Richie had gone through most of those 8 months, fallen off a rope, broken his back, spent 2 years in rehab, and then restarted back at week 1 to go through all the training again. So he kind of became our officer. He knew what was going on, he knew what needed to be done, and he would develop the young guys. We had Liam, who had previously served in Northern Ireland with the British Paras as well. Liam had been to Bosnia, Kosovo, all sorts of fun and weird and wonderful places, but not really a leader. Lovely guy, amazing, and he kind of became the dad of the troop. He kind of became the guy who would give someone a hug when they needed it and look after them, and generally they needed to have a hug after I was done with them. Because again, very angry, 5'6", little Australian ginger kid yelling and screaming at people, I essentially became the troop's enforcer. So when folks weren't doing things, I was the one there telling them to do it, which I hated. I hated what it turned me into, but at the same time, it provided opportunities, I suppose, to look after people when they needed it. Sometimes you have to play the bad guy. The photo of the snow is an interesting one for 2 reasons. About 8 weeks before this, we'd been out on a training exercise. The British Royal Marines are well known as the Arctic warfare specialists for the UK. That's why we spend a lot of time in the snow. I will laugh and say that I'm much more comfortable at -30 than I am at +30. Very warm-blooded. And running around in the snow is something I'm very comfortable with. A lot of guys took time to adjust to that. And one of the early cold weather exercises that we did essentially is wet and dry routine. So you have 2 sets of uniform. One of them you run around in, you get wet, you get muddy, all that sort of stuff. As soon as you stop anywhere, you'd strip naked, towel yourself off, put on the other clothes, the dry clothes that you pull out of a dry bag, and you get yourself into a sleeping bag and you'd sleep. Any chance you could, you'd sleep. Which sounds great. It's an absolutely fantastic thing to strip off wet clothes and get in and and actually get a chance to get your head down for a little bit. Not so pleasant is when it's -5 and you're putting that stuff back on again, because you've got to keep those dry clothes dry. So you have to put the wet gear back on, you have to break the ice and put the clothes back on, bash your boots so that they don't crack as well. And this particular exercise that we did, a couple of the guys decided not to do it. It wasn't that cold for this one. This was about 4 or 5 degrees, and they decided they were going to stay in their wet gear. We were only going to be down for an hour or so. We had a navigation exercise in the middle of the night that we needed to do, so instead of getting changed, they didn't. And you think, it's not that big a deal. Like, just stay in it for an hour or so, you'll be fine. We used to break hypothermia down into 3 different stages. Stage 1 is the point where if you tense up, you still can't stop shaking. That's when you know you're actually hypothermic, is if you tense yourself up, you can't stop the shakes. Stage 2, the blood would start to shift away from your hands, your extremities, and start to pull in the centre of your body and start to go numb. Stage 3, people would start to fall asleep and they wouldn't wake up again. And one night, I had someone come and grab me and tell me, hey, there's 2 guys, there's something wrong. And by the time I got to them, they were falling asleep. Because they hadn't changed their clothes. Something so small, like change. As unpleasant as it was, they wouldn't get changed, and they were falling asleep. So 6 of us picked them up and ran 2.5 kilometres through mud to throw them in the back of an ambulance. It's funny the stuff that runs through your head when you're in an environment like that, because you start to realise that if you trip, he's dead. If your fingers, your hands are cramping up, like your arm is burning, but if you let go, he's dead. When you start running on the razor's edge with this sort of stuff, people start dying really quickly. And you start to realise just how important those small factors are in whether or not someone stays alive or not. The other interesting thing about this this photo, the snow one up here, I'm the guy trying to get away from everyone else, by the way, out the front here, because I hate human beings, apparently. That's why I want to move to a cold, dead planet. I didn't realise it, but I had a tick. So I'd been with the army here in Australia. I had been out into places like Bindoon, where you come back and you pick off 30 or 40 ticks from a weekend out, and no big deal. I got back from this exercise, found a little tick just under my stomach, and went, oh yeah, cool. Took that off. Don't know where that's come from, but sure. And then I started to get sick. So for the next 5 or 6 weeks, I went from being one of the fittest guys in the troop of commandos to not being able to walk up a set of stairs. And no one could figure out why. And all came back to that little tick. So I had a bacterial infection. A few of you will be familiar with Lyme's disease. And in the space of 6 weeks, it took me from being super fit to needing to learn to walk again. I spent 6-7 days in hospital. I lost 8 kilos. And yeah, I was on a walking frame when I came out of there. Something so small, something I didn't even pay attention to. It happened dozens and dozens of times again, but the environment was different. It was a deer tick. Instead of it being a kangaroo or a cattle tick, it was a deer tick, and it had Lyme's disease. So again, if you have kids and they start going, oh, you know, I'd love to be a British commando, don't do that. Don't let them do that. Break hands, fingers, whatever you need to do. Like, don't let them do that. I will say I learnt more about myself in the 12 months I spent with the commandos than I have at any other point in my life. It's a super steep learning curve. The biggest thing that I suppose came out of it for me is that as much as I excelled at what I was doing at, I didn't agree with what we were doing. I didn't agree with what the job was, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it ever again. In amongst all of this, I started to recognise that I had some fairly significant scars from the military, that it had changed me as who I was, and I kind of needed to talk about it. So I did the responsible thing. Instead of going and finding a therapist, I started becoming a stand-up comic. This is Gerald the baboon, by the way. Gerald used to tell kindergartners about the apocalypse. My first comedy show was called Apocalypse Meow, and it was essentially about the word apocalypse. People think, oh, doomsday, all that sort of stuff, and that's what the show was about, but the actual word apocalypse comes from the old Greek, meaning lifting of a veil. So it's actually about discovery. It's about pulling back the blinders and finding and discovering a larger truth. The word revelation in the Bible is drawn from apocalypse, talking about revealing a larger truth. And the larger truth for me was that as bad as things could be, you always get through it. And if you didn't, you're dead. You're not going to be around to care about it much longer anyway. So do what you can to try and help people, do your best, and push through. And if it all goes horribly wrong, whatever. One of the things I suppose I learnt, especially picking up landmines with the engineers, probably not going to feel it anyway. We used to talk about pink mist quite a bit because that would be about all that was left behind if something went wrong. So push on through, do what you can, and if it goes wrong, whatever, it's gone wrong. Not a great approach to stand-up comedy, I discovered. Certainly not something that people wanted to hear in comedy clubs, but it was my therapy. It's also where Keith came in. So Keith was a mask for me. It was an opportunity for me to vent, to be able to talk about stuff that I suppose I didn't want to talk about and found very challenging. And it was a way of me being able to talk about some of the awful stuff that had happened with the Royal Marines that I literally had never spoken about. Keith talked about it instead. Keith told the stories, and that then gave me the chance to start opening up about some of the stuff that had happened. So for the last 10 years, 12 years now actually, I've been talking about Mars One, because during my show at the Edinburgh Fringe about Keith, I started researching my next show about getting out of stand-up comedy. I was done with it, and I wanted to have a bit of a metaphor for leaving it all behind. And so I started to write a comedy show about sending people one way to Mars, because that's kind of the way I wanted. I just wanted one way, let's get out of this. While writing those shows and talking about that, I also started to ask what it was I wanted to do with my time on Earth. If I was going to leave, if I was going to go and live on another planet, what were the things I wanted to do while I was here? And it kind of circled back to scuba diving. My dad had been a military diver. I'd been a military diver as well, and it always felt like work. So I asked, what was the thing that I really wanted to do? And it was cave diving. So a few years back, about 5 years back, I went, you know what? I've taught scuba, I've worked as a diver, I've done all these things. I want to do something that I actually really enjoy. And I went and studied and learned to become a cave diver. I run a team now called the Soggy Wombats. If you ever want to go and look up the Soggy Wombats, we're a cave exploration team of about 7 or 8 of us, and we go and discover new caves. And so far, we've discovered 2 major new cave networks in the lower southeast of South Australia, around Mount Gambier. This is my mate Martin, an absolutely mad Englishman, and the pair of us are the push divers. We're the 2 idiots that find the smallest possible hole that you can find, squeeze through it underwater to try and find big new caves on the other side. So I did have a little bit of video, but we don't have enough time for it, unfortunately. But if you want to go and look up some of the Soggy Wombat stuff, you'll see us squeezing through horrifying things. I'm claustrophobic, by the way, but this is the sort of thing that you do to push through and discover new stuff. Most people think that this is what scuba diving is, and that's great. I used to teach this for a long time. The gear that we use is a little bit different. So side mount cylinders on the side of your body so you can squeeze through, things that you can clip off, big heavy ropes to pull yourself through when things are totally zeroed out, you can't see a thing. But, and that was the video, which I don't think is going to play. We also did a lot of survey. So it's all about discovery. This tiny little black box is all about discovering new stuff. We've used that to go and map some of those major networks and find how they all connect together. Things that you thought were going one way, turns out, slight difference, connects somewhere else. Done multiple trips out to the Nullarbor as well, so we're actively exploring and discovering new caves out there as well. It's feeding into that exploration side of things that drew me to Mars One in the first place, that desire to go out and try new things, discover new things, and try and make sense of the universe a little bit further. So we've done some amazing things. Mars One might still happen. It was shut down in 2020. COVID basically killed it off, trying to get funding for it. is what destroyed it. And it's what led to me shifting gears and moving into cave diving to try and do something that I really love, to try and feed that desire. It has been a really hard few years trying to adjust. After 10 years of dedicating your life to leaving the planet, having to turn around to friends and family and go, you know what, guys, I'm staying after all. It's good for relationships, but yeah, it's definitely been a challenging few years. After the first crew arrived, the goal was to send another crew 2 years later. And 2 years after that, another crew, building up 4 people at a time up to a crew of about 20 or 30. And originally, the goal was, once we get to that point, we're able to send crews of 100, 150 people at a time. I don't know what happens next. I don't know what the next step is. All I know is I love the things that I get to do now, and I 100% appreciate, I suppose, the opportunity and paying attention to those little things, those tiniest things that have changed the career and path that I've followed. I get to look back on that now and go, I'd never realised that tiny little tick saved my life. I might have had to learn to walk again, but it stopped me going out to a horrifying place where I had multiple friends killed. So there's a really good chance that those tiny things that you think are upsets, setbacks, turn out to be the biggest and best change that ever happened. I would never have signed up for a one-way mission to Mars if I'd been out in Afghanistan. So on that note, I will say thank you, and I'll hand back to our MC. If you want to go and have a look at some really claustrophobic, awful cave diving videos, check out the Soggy Wombat stuff. And I suppose if folks are interested, I've covered a lot of this sort of stuff as part of the last book that I wrote, Cosmic Nomad, which really looks at what do you do with your time while you're still left on Earth. So with that, I'll hand back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Stay here. Just stay here. Thank you so much. What a journey. You really did lift the veil.
Good.
Right? Like, wow. So many things went through my head. Everything from Howard Wolowitz and the Big Bang, right? Yep. Sure. Geeky nerd out here. Right through to MacGyver and Top Gun Maverick. It seems like you've lived a life of 1,000 different careers and experiences, but in every one of those you could see the importance of those little details shining through. And I know full well that Slido has been working overtime with questions. So I'm going to ask you to make your way over to the sofa. Take your pick of the chairs. Right. This isn't musical chairs. Maybe get yourself a drink, wet your whistle, while we prepare for question and answer session. Now, Josh, our audience can come at you from 2 frontiers today. We're just limiting it, right? Like no moon. One is via technology and Slido, and the other one is the traditional one of the direct question from the audience amplified over microphone. So if you want to ask a question in the traditional manner, can I please ask you to say your name and department and keep your question concise and without preamble. I know we're really good at writing preamble, but we don't want it today. So that we can have Josh respond to as many of your questions as possible. Can you now take a couple of minutes at your tables to consider any questions that were sparked during Josh's wide-ranging conversation this morning? Put any extra questions in Slido, vote some up that are already in there if they're really the ones that you want our moderator to ask. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes now, chat away, and I will interrupt you rudely again shortly. Okay, everyone, I'm going to interrupt those ambulance sounds once again. Thank you so much for the chitter-chatter. I hope it's been productive. But Jeff, it's over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Lucy Matthews to the stage, who has been another foundational member of the Emerging Leaders Working Group. Lucy is a very motivational, considerate and encouraging leader and has provided invaluable thought leadership to the working group and to IPAA Queensland. Attendees, please continue to send through your questions that have arisen throughout the conversations, and Lucy will help mediate the conversation.
was awesome.
And don't forget that the most creative and innovative question receives a prize.
Okay. Well, what an absolute privilege it's been to listening to your story this morning, and the privilege of getting to ask all of your questions that have been coming through on the app. I'm going to kick off with one of our emerging leaders, Juan, who sent through a question around failure, which I think is often taboo, and yet it's something that you kind of lean into.
Oh, massively.
So his question is, do you have advice on managing personal setbacks or failures while maintaining high performance in your professional life? Sorry.
I do. I suppose I have a bit of a mantra, and it's come from the Royal Marines. What's the worst that could happen? So if you failed, if something went wrong, what's the worst? And in our situation, people died, and that's obviously like not a great thing to happen, but is what you're doing going to lead to someone dying? Probably not. If your career goes sideways or goes in a different direction, is that necessarily a bad thing, or is it an opportunity to do something different? I suppose I am a bit of an outlier in that I fail at something and go, cool, screw it, let's try something else. And that's not for everyone. But that attitude, I suppose, comes back to what's the worst that can happen. I didn't delve into it in the talk, I suppose, but like I've spent periods homeless, I've carried myself over all sorts of different places, spent a lot of time alone, and that develops a level of self-reliance, I suppose, where you go, okay, well, I got through this. For a while, I kept a list of worst ofs. I've never felt as bad as this. I've never been as cold as this or as hot as this, like all these different sort of extremes of experience. It's May now, but a couple of weeks ago is an anniversary for me of still being here. There was a night back in 2008, April 19th, that I still not commemorate, but I'm still very grateful that I'm here, where I'd made a decision to be here rather than not be here anymore. And I still reference back to that and say, no matter how bad this particular thing might feel, nothing felt as bad as that. I've never gotten myself in a position where my life was so bad as that night was, and I got through that. So this is nothing. I'll get through this. This will be fine. So I try and treat life like an experiment, and experiments fail. Stuff goes wrong, and it's not right or wrong. It's just data.
Yeah.
Like it's all part of life. So if you fail at something, I tried such and such, it doesn't make you a bad person. I hate the term character building because it gets abused all the time, but it is part of who you are. So. We are all human. We stuff up. We make mistakes. We are not perfect at certain things. I don't really see why we need to be. But yeah, I know that's not an attitude or culture that a lot of folks embrace. The idea of we're perfect.
I love that answer. I think being non-frontline, I'm in a position where oftentimes my leaders will remind me, it's okay, no one's going to die. And actually sometimes hearing that is a good reminder of why it's important to experiment and why there's value in failure. So, next question, kind of bouncing off that is, have you ever battled with imposter syndrome? This one's from Michael, by the way. And if so, any advice or strategies to push through the noise?
I am not used to wearing a collar, so I feel like an imposter right now. I suppose walking up here and looking at this crowd, all bright, young, enthusiastic, well-dressed future leaders, folks who are on the up and up. I suppose I use self-defacing language about myself because it keeps me in check. I never thought that I had the skill or talent to be an army officer. And when I did think that maybe that was an option, as soon as I got set back, as soon as there was any issue with it or whatever, I went, oh no, that's fine. That's not for me. So yeah, 100%. And I suppose it's probably a surprise to folks, but I am a natural introvert. I don't actually like crowds. You're lovely, it's great, like it's nice to be here, but also I really love spending time by myself. And so stepping on stage, being a comedian, I was never comfortable with the term comedian either. Like I tell funny stories, but being in an environment where like you're being introduced as a comedian or this, that, the other, people expect me to be like 6'4" or something. And I'm like, no, I'm this tiny little angry kid that just throws himself at stuff, bombs out, and then goes, okay, well, screw it, let's try something else. So no, always got imposter syndrome, always feeling like I don't belong where I am, but I'm here and you're stuck with me. So yeah.
Reassuring to know that someone so accomplished as yourself suffers from probably the same imposter syndrome that particularly emerging leaders feel. One of my favourite questions from Ellie, who is writing from OCG, and a bit of a curly one that I've left till later down because it might take a while to answer. Do you think the lure of other planets distracts billionaires from trying to fix Earth's problems?
So this comes up a lot, and it's an interesting one. Elon's super easy to point at and make fun of, because, yeah, at the end of the day, I come back to intent. I don't think billionaires are bad people. I think they're just people with an enormous amount of power. And so there are lots and lots of billionaires out there who are fixing Earth's problems. Someone like Elon and Jeff Bezos, they get a lot of attention because they are doing something outlandish and wild. I think we as a species kind of need that, and they are outliers, and they do get criticised because they're different, because they're doing something that is different. I just think it's folks doing folks, and folks trying to do the best that they can with the resources they've got. And those particular guys have got huge amounts of resources, and so they're doing things that they think are going to make the species or themselves better. They're still people, like that's... So the argument around trying to make things better here on Earth, 100%. Like, yeah, we should be trying to make things better on Earth, but part of the way that we make things better on Earth is by going and, I suppose, looking back. Some of the greatest perspective we've had as a species on our place in the universe came from when Voyager 2 was turned around and took a photo back, and Carl Sagan described it as the pale blue dot, that tiny, like, single pixel in this enormous solar system, and we're this tiny little blue dot, and he describes like the entire history of humanity happening on that pale blue dot. If we weren't exploring space and looking back, we wouldn't be getting those perspectives. The current, like today's environmental movements and focuses, really, if you trace back a lot of the history, they stem from, I think it was Apollo 10, where they took a photo of Earth looking back from the moon, and that perspective of this gorgeous blue marble in the blackness of space gave people the perspective to go, hey, we need to really look after that. So the technologies, the things that will keep us alive on Mars are also technologies that will help with agriculture here on Earth, with being able to look after the atmosphere. It's all part of it. So again, it's folks trying to do the best that they can by our species. And that can be very challenging about having all these resources and people asking how you allocate the resources that you've got available.
Great answer. I thought you were going to go on a Keith the koala kind of tangent. Because I know
Keith's long gone.
Bring back. I don't know if we have time for any more questions, which is rather sad, but I think your view on exploration and trialling things and how that can benefit society, and the work that you do is really inspiring. So I really appreciate your time this morning on behalf of everyone here, and I'll throw back to the MCs.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Josh, everyone. All right, thank you all for putting your questions to Josh in good faith, and sorry we didn't get to put all of them to him and we only got to ask a few, but it's not over yet. Jeff, we're on a journey. Where do we head now?
So next I'm thrilled to introduce Dave Woodall, Chief of Commercial from QSuper, to the stage. QSuper are a key sponsor for the event, and it's fantastic to have their continued support for IPAA events.
Good morning, folks. And Deirdre, thank you for your opening remarks. If you can remember those opening remarks, it was a lovely, warm welcome. Thank you. I'm still happy to meet you, as you suggested, out the back at the end of the session, to give you some pre-retirement advice, of course. I have a few notes that our team have prepared for me to speak to, but just quickly, the blank section is personal reflections on Keynote. So, Josh, I was sitting here listening to you, contemplating connections between Australian Retirement Trust, pensions, super, and for the first 20 minutes you spoke about toilet systems, human waste, disposal, and I don't know if there's any journalists in the room, but I was worried that I might be misquoted in connecting that topic with superannuation. But as you progressed, there are two very strong themes that I think are very relevant. As I hope I'm speaking to many of you in this audience as members of QSuper, Heritage QSuper, part of Australian Retirement Trust. Since the merger 2 years ago, we've continued to grow very, very strongly. In fact, if markets are kind today and tomorrow, we might tick over magical 300 bill by close of business tomorrow. And whilst we've had that tremendous growth, which is important, we've had to keep focused on the little things too. The little things that matter and are really important. Like answering the phones and maintaining our member service levels as we've worked through our growth and our unification and integration journey to date. And I think the second thing that I've taken from your remarks, diversity of experience and diversity of thinking and the challenge mindset that comes with that is something that's very topical for us at the moment. As we get to 300 bill, we will slip into the top 25 global pension funds in the world. And increasingly, as we move through the final steps of our integration of Sunsuper and QSuper, we need to have that global mindset around what good looks like. And what good looks like is no longer defined by the Australian peer group that we compete with. It's defined by that global peer group. And so increasingly, we need to think about innovation, capability of our people, future roles, and diversity of experience and thinking. So thank you. You got me there in the end, so I appreciate it. I'd just like to thank Deirdre and the team, and congratulations on your continued success and growth at IPAA broadly, but also with this particular event, which, as you said, is the 5th time that we've sponsored this, and we hope to have many more to come. I was here at just after 7 o'clock and there was a couple of hundred people standing in the rain waiting to get in, so that's a good data point for enthusiasm and support for today's event. Australian Retirement Trust looks after, as I said, $300 billion worth of assets for a large proportion of Australia, but particularly Queensland because of our heritage. Of our 2.4 million members, because of that heritage, still 70% of our members are based in Queensland, both in rural and regional areas of Queensland. So it's very much our core home base. Am I speaking to a bunch of ART members here this morning? Don't be, we're putting our hands up to see if you want to go to Mars. It's easy to put it up and say you're a member of ART. A handful. Okay, we'll see, we need to work on that. You may have seen in the last week our new campaign in market. It's a big blue monster. It's pretty hard to miss, not to miss. Anyone seen it? It's called Awaken Your Super, and it's our call to action to ask all of you and all of Australians to start thinking about how powerful their superannuation could be for them. What is your monster? What's the monstrous opportunity? And how do we help you awaken and start having conversations about it? And with that, I will thank you once again and look forward to being here next year. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dave, and it's good to see that our super is in good hands. All right. I'd also like to thank everyone who attended the event today, and hopefully it's provided a valuable opportunity for networking between emerging leaders and chief executives. If you have any feedback for the event, I encourage you to provide it via the survey link, which should hopefully be up shortly, and it will also be emailed out to you as well.
This morning really has been an opportunity for us to explore beyond our usual universes, to connect, to challenge our thinking, and to explore possibilities towards the rich destination for discovery and leadership in public purpose work. Today's event has been made possible with the support of our major sponsor, Q Super, and thank you, Dave, for a brilliant summary of today's event. And we look forward to continuing to work with you too. We also would like to thank the IPAA Queensland Emerging Leaders Working Group sponsor On Talent and event sponsor KPMG, thanks to Dan and his team. Thank you to each of your organisations. We value your support in making today happen. Events like this don't just happen. Magic is created by teams of people we don't see. The Emerging Leaders Working Group, especially the foundational members Regan Vella from DSS, Miriam Yates from the University of Queensland, and of course our magnificent moderator and my co-MC as well, so Lucy Matthews and Jeff Eichen, and the new members of the refreshed IPAA Queensland Emerging Leaders Working Group who have been on the ground supporting today. And I'd like to call out especially the IPAA Queensland team, Andrew Wills, Patricia Galliford and Vandula Habrova. Thank you. You have all invoked your sparkle and magic to conjure up an incredible event. Also a big thanks to our Epicure and Brisbane City Hall staff who have been working away to keep our coffee cups filled. To IPAA Queensland Council and President Deirdre Mulcairn, thank you for your trust and support of the Emerging Leaders Working Group and for your guidance in the development of this event. Another special big thanks to my co-MC, Jeff Eichen, and our magic moderator, Lucy, who took a giant leap to be up here today. So thank you, it's been a privilege and an honour. Now bear with me because I have two shameless plugs. Who would I be if I didn't have a shameless plug? 1, continuing your journey of leadership discovery from here is only a small step away. IPAA Queensland's Emerging Stewards on the Couch series kicks off on the 20th of June with Yasmina Yoldik taking to the couch to have a conversation with Russell Fairbanks from Luminary to discuss her leadership journey, her career challenges and the priorities for the Department of Justice and Attorney General. It does promise to be an engaging conversation. Number 2, your voice matters to us here at IPAA Queensland and is important for shaping what we do. So can I please ask you to complete our feedback survey using the QR code up on your screen. To each of you, thank you for your openness, time and investment this morning and for engaging in this morning's event with such fervour and bravery. And another massive thanks to Josh Richards this morning, who took us through everything from poop right through to out of this world and then to the depths back in earth. So thank you, Josh. My one last word, go well and keep taking little steps towards making those giant leaps happen. Thank you.